to commend Sierra Leone for a successful presidency during the month of August. Thanks to Undersecretary General DiCarlo, Director Warsarnu, Dr. Bron Harlev, and Ms. Novak for your briefings during what is the first meeting in nearly a year on this issue. Hirsch Goldberg Paulin loved geography. For his bar mitzvah, he asked for atlases and maps, for the gift of understanding the world, of wrapping it in his arms. His father imagined that his son would someday work for National Geographic, but I think Hirsch may have also become an American diplomat, a peace builder, someone who could forge even the deepest divides, and maybe even here in this room. I had the honor of getting to know Hirsch through his parents, Rachel and John. On October 7th, Hamas killed their son's friend, blew off their son's hand, and then stole their son's future, holding him hostage in the tunnels beneath Gaza for 331 days. Devastation has a blurring effect. Days bleed together, the sheer scale of loss anonymizes its victims, and yet Rachel and John insisted that the world know their son as a person. Every single day they relived the worst moments of their lives, talking to anyone and everyone who would listen to them talk about Hirsch. Not only where he was, but who he was, why his fate and the fate of hundreds of hostages mattered, and why the fate of thousands upon thousands of innocent Palestinians mattered too. That they too were people, each containing a universe, who wanted and deserved peace, who wanted to and deserved to live. This past weekend, we learned the devastating news I hoped and prayed would never come. That after nearly 11 months in captivity, Hirsch, along with 5 other hostages, was brutally killed by Hamas. That he and Kamel and Alex and Eden and Ori and Almag would never be reunited with their families. Moments like these tempt people to retreat to their sides, to allow hurt to become hate. But I think about what Hirsch's father said just a few weeks ago, that there is, and I quote, a surplus of agony on all sides of the tragic conflict in the Middle East. That in a competition of pain, there are no winners. And so today I want to speak to the many, many people living in agony. That includes hostages that remain in the hands of Hamas, hailing from across the world, including the United States. We're doing all we can to bring these Americans home and all the hostages home to their families. The 6 hostages killed this weekend were executed at the same time negotiators were discussing the names of individuals to be released in a ceasefire deal. It calls into question the sincerity of Hamas negotiators, and it reveals yet again the ugly truth about the vile, depraved ideology that Hamas represents, from its massacre of 1,200 people to its weaponization of sexual violence. These latest murders confirm that Hamas is a terrorist organization. I know some members of this council won't acknowledge that, but that's the simple truth. No member of this council would tolerate their citizens being taken hostage and murdered, not a single one of us. The United States strongly condemns Hamas's brutality. It is long, long past time this council do the same. Make no mistake, we can condemn Hamas for what they are and still have empathy for the suffering Palestinians in Gaza, men, women, and children who who are also experiencing agony. While Sinwar hides in tunnels underneath the ground and his henchmen murder hostages, Palestinian civilians are living in a hell on earth. Their lives continue to be put at risk by his cowardice and intransigence. As President Biden has made clear, Hamas's leadership will pay for their crimes. They must be held accountable. They cannot control Gaza. At the same time, we know that the best way to rescue the remaining hostages and alleviate the suffering of Palestinian civilians is through a negotiated ceasefire deal, one that will release the hostages and create conditions to enable a surge in life-saving aid in Gaza. Colleagues, we cannot lose patience with diplomacy. Diplomacy is not a matter of snapping our fingers and voila. It takes hard work. It takes effort, and unfortunately, it takes time. It has not failed. After all, it was diplomacy that helped secure the release of more than 100 hostages in November. And it is through diplomacy that we aim to bring the remaining hostages home and finally put this horrific conflict on a path toward a durable conclusion. The Israeli people should understand that the deal on the table is one their leaders can accept, because this is a deal that ensures Israel's security. As President Biden emphasized when announcing the principles of this deal, Hamas is no longer capable of carrying out another attack on the scale of October 7th. And so we continue to work closely with Qatar and Egypt to find a way forward and do all we can to make this deal a reality once and for all. At this crucial inflection point, it is vital that anyone who stands for peace stand with the three of us and continue to apply pressure on Hamas to end its brutality and accept the deal on the table, which is based on the principles and framework this Council endorsed in Resolution 2735. We cannot just move on. There is no palatable alternative to this diplomacy. Colleagues, we met last week on the issue of polio and protecting civilians. Since that meeting, Israel has coordinated closely with the UN to ensure the WHO and UNICEF could begin implementing a phased campaign vaccinating children under the age of 10 in Gaza. The United States welcomes the initial progress, hundreds of thousands of vaccines administered in the first days of the campaign alone, and we reiterate the importance of UN and NGO personnel having the safety and space to administer polio vaccines and inoculate Gaza's at-risk population. Children's lives depend on their success. Separately, we're closely following the situation in the West Bank. We're concerned about the recent uptick in Israeli military activity there and believe that actions could escalate tensions must be curtailed. In particular, violent rhetoric and attack by extremist settlers against Palestinian civilians in the West Bank are unacceptable and must stop. Israeli authorities must take measures to protect West Bank communities from harm, including by intervening to stop such violence and by holding all perpetrators accountable. And we continue to emphasize that a revitalized and reformed Palestinian Authority is in Israel's own interest, and that steps that undermine the PA will not make Israel more secure. Indeed, Hamas's brutal murder of hostages is a reminder that a terrorist group does not and can never claim to represent the vast majority of Palestinians. But Hamas's hateful ideology cannot be defeated through silence. Leaders in Ramallah and in countries throughout the region must condemn Hamas's violent actions and increase public pressure on Hamas to accept the deal on the table. Colleagues, I hoped and believed that I would see Hersh Goldberg-Pollen alive, that I could have met him, talked to him about the magic of exploring the world, of healing the world. I believed that I could have hugged him and told him how hard his parents fought for him, how hard they fought for every hostage family, every innocent Israeli and Palestinian whose life was destroyed by the scourge of war. I'm devastated that I will never be able to meet Hersh, but I know that his memory lives on in his extraordinary parents. I know that even though they have every reason to crawl under the covers and never emerge, they will continue to fight for humanity, to fight for dignity, for peace, for diplomacy, even when it feels slow, even when it feels impossible. For the return of the hostages, for an end to this horrific war, and for a better future for us all. We owe it to them and their beloved son, to parents and children like them, Israeli and Palestinians alike, to do the same. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie Mesdames Di Carlo et Woezornou pour leurs interventions. La France a appris avec indignation l'assassinat par le Hamas de 6 otages. Nos pensées vont vers leurs familles et vers leurs proches, à qui nous adressons toutes nos condoléances. La France exprime sa pleine solidarité envers le peuple israélien. Elle redit sa condamnation des attaques terroristes du 7 octobre. Elle réaffirme son attachement indéfectible à la sécurité d'Israël. Nous appelons à la libération de tous les otages, y compris celle de nos compatriotes. C'est une priorité absolue pour la France. Monsieur le Président, un cessez-le-feu immédiat et permanent est indispensable pour mettre fin aux souffrances de la population et pour permettre l'acheminement massif de l'aide. Cela ne peut plus attendre. La situation humanitaire est catastrophique, tant au plan sanitaire qu'au plan alimentaire. La France salue le début de la campagne de vaccination contre la polio, grâce à l'OMS, l'UNICEF et l'UNRWA. L'accord sur des pauses humanitaires localisées qui a permis cette campagne doit prévaloir aussi longtemps que la situation sur le terrain le nécessitera. Cette campagne de vaccination démontre qu'il est possible de permettre aux acteurs humanitaires d'agir sur le terrain. Cela doit devenir la règle, comme l'exige le droit international humanitaire. Monsieur le Président, la France est très préoccupée face à la dégradation rapide de la situation au nord de la Cisjordanie, à la suite des opérations militaires israéliennes. Celles-ci contribuent à l'instabilité et elles sont de nature à déclencher un grave cycle de violence dans toute la Cisjordanie. La France condamne la politique de colonisation. Celle-ci est contraire au droit international. Les autorités israéliennes doivent faire cesser les violences et la politique de terreur de certains colons extrémistes. Monsieur le Président, la seule solution pour mettre fin à la guerre ainsi qu'au désastre humanitaire qui dure depuis 11 mois dans la bande de Gaza, c'est un accord entre le Hamas et Israël. La France soutient les efforts de médiation des États-Unis, de l'Égypte et du Qatar. Ces négociations doivent enfin aboutir. La France appelle les parties à faire les compromis nécessaires. Face à la montée des tensions au Moyen-Orient, ce Conseil doit tout faire pour éviter un embrasement régional. La France poursuit ses efforts en ce sens, en lien avec ses partenaires. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and I join others in thanking Under-Secretary General Di Carlo, Director Woezornou, Dr. Bron-Harlov and Ms. Novak for briefing us today. Last week, we heard the news that the bodies of 6 Israeli hostages were recovered in Gaza. We condemn their murder by Hamas. My Prime Minister has conveyed his thoughts and prayers for the families and the Israeli people. The UK supported Israel's request for this briefing to shine a spotlight on the abhorrent crimes of Hamas and their impact on innocent civilians. It is also entirely right, as Algeria proposed, to focus on recent grave developments in the West Bank and Gaza. President, of the 253 hostages taken in the horrific 7th of October terrorist attacks, 101 hostages remain captive in Gaza and subject to unimaginable horror. We once again condemn Hamas terrorist attacks in the strongest terms. We reiterate our demand for Hamas to release the hostages immediately. There can be no doubt that Hamas pays not the slightest heed to international humanitarian law. We urge all parties to agree a ceasefire deal which would bring an end to the ordeal of these hostages. Israel continues to face threats, not only from Hamas, but also from Iran and its range of hostile proxies who openly call for Israel's annihilation. Iran should be in no doubt of our commitment to challenge their malign and destabilizing activity and our commitment to Israel's security. President, the suffering of Palestinians also worsens each day. Over 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, many of whom are women and children. The most basic needs of children and thousands of orphaned children are unmet. A ceasefire deal offers an opportunity to end their suffering. As we've heard, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is beyond appalling, with dire sanitary conditions, a serious risk of famine, and now polio. We welcome the polio vaccination campaign and urge Israel to continue to cooperate with the WHO and health agencies to ensure that the full 90% of children who need to be are vaccinated. More generally, as we've heard, humanitarian access remains inadequate, with attacks on convoys, evacuation orders undermining operations, and aid far below Israel's stated commitment to flood Gaza with aid. We urge Israel to do much more to ensure life-saving food and medical supplies reach civilians in Gaza. As my Foreign Secretary said this week, we are also deeply concerned by credible claims of mistreatment of Palestinian detainees, which the International Committee of the Red Cross cannot investigate after being denied access by Israel. President, concerns on the treatment of detainees and humanitarian access were part of my government's review into Israel's international humanitarian law compliance. As a result, my Foreign Secretary took the decision to suspend certain UK arms export licenses to Israel earlier this week. This decision in no way undermines our unwavering commitment to Israel's security. Whilst we recognise Israel's need to defend itself against security threats, the UK is also deeply worried by the ongoing IDF operations in the West Bank, particularly the reports of civilian casualties and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Israel must also tackle the accelerating settler violence and end its illegal expansion of settlements, which undermine prospects for the realisation of the two-state solution. President, let me conclude by thanking the US, Qatar and Egypt for their efforts in the ongoing negotiations. The parties have had time to study the deal on the table. The parties must now bridge their differences and end the suffering by agreeing to a deal and immediate ceasefire and rediscover the path to a two-state solution. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom and I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et comme il s'agit de notre première déclaration au Conseil ce mois, permettez-moi tout d'abord de remercier la Sierra Leone pour sa présidence le mois passé et de vous souhaiter beaucoup de succès à l'occasion de votre présidence en ce mois de septembre. J'aimerais, comme mes collègues, également remercier les 4 briefeurs de ce jour, la secrétaire générale aux affaires politiques, Rose-Marie Di Carlo, la directrice des opérations du plaidoyer à OCHA, Madame Edem Bozornou, Madame Efrat Braun-Harlef, directrice du Centre médical Schneider, et Madame Yuli Novak, directrice exécutive de B'Tselem, de leur présentation. La Suisse a fermement condamné les actes de terreur, la prise et la détention d'otages perpétrés par le Hamas et d'autres groupes armés palestiniens depuis le 7 octobre dernier. Nous sommes profondément choqués par les informations confirmées par l'ONU selon lesquelles 6 otages ont été exécutés par le Hamas à Gaza le 1er septembre. La capture d'otages et leur exécution sont des violations du droit international humanitaire. Ces violations constituent des crimes de guerre et leurs auteurs doivent être traduits en justice. Nous condamnons ces actes avec la plus grande fermeté et présentons nos condoléances à leurs proches. La Suisse appelle à la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de tous les otages. Ces derniers et leurs familles vivent depuis 11 mois un véritable calvaire. Les otages doivent être traités avec humanité, en accord avec les normes du droit international et bénéficier sans plus tarder des visites du CICR et de l'aide médicale dont ils ont besoin. Cela vaut aussi pour toutes les personnes détenues par Israël en lien avec le conflit, en particulier les mineurs. Monsieur le Président, la situation humanitaire à Gaza demeure catastrophique. Nous venons de l'entendre encore. Nous rappelons que les civils et les infrastructures civiles sont protégés. Aussi, nous condamnons toutes les attaques à l'encontre des civils qui représentent des violations flagrantes du droit international humanitaire et des crimes de guerre. Le personnel humanitaire doit être protégé afin de venir en aide aux civils dans le besoin, comme demandé par la résolution 2730. Pour cela, les armes doivent se taire. Ceci est crucial pour permettre aux agences de l'ONU et à ses partenaires de mener à bien les 2 phases de vaccination nécessaires et protéger 640 000 enfants contre la polio à Gaza. La Suisse salue le fait que, selon l'OMS, et nous venons de l'entendre aussi, la première phase se déroule sans incident majeur dans le centre de la bande de Gaza. Nous saluons le personnel humanitaire pour son engagement et son courage dans des conditions très difficiles et exhortons toutes les parties à continuer à faciliter cette campagne. Comme il a été dit durant la séance demandée par la Suisse et le Royaume-Uni la semaine passée, cette campagne démontre qu'une opération humanitaire d'envergure est possible à Gaza si les hostilités cessent et qu'un accès humanitaire sûr, rapide et sans entrave est garanti, conformément au droit international humanitaire. Il est grand temps que cela devienne une réalité, et ce, dans toute la bande de Gaza. Monsieur le Président, un cessez-le-feu est impératif et urgent dans toute la bande de Gaza. La Suisse réitère son soutien à la médiation des États-Unis, du Qatar et de l'Égypte pour trouver un accord en ce sens, conformément à la résolution 2735 de ce Conseil. Un tel cessez-le-feu apportera aussi une contribution majeure à la désescalade régionale, mais cela n'est pas suffisant. Pour éviter à tout prix la régionalisation du conflit, le respect du droit international, y compris du droit international humanitaire et des droits humains, est nécessaire. Cela s'applique aussi à la Cisjordanie, y compris Jérusalem-Est, où la violence n'a jamais été aussi élevée depuis la seconde intifada en particulier en raison des attaques de colons et des opérations menées par les forces de sécurité israéliennes, comme celles actuellement dans les gouvernorats de Jenin, Tulkarem et Toubas. Dans ces opérations, l'usage de la force par Israël doit notamment répondre aux critères de la nécessité et de la proportionnalité et respecter les droits de tout individu à la vie et à la sécurité de sa personne. À défaut, et comme le rappelle aussi la Cour internationale de justice dans son avis consultatif du 19 juillet, un usage excessif de la force et le fait qu'Israël manque de prévenir ou de punir les attaques des colons sont incompatibles avec les obligations d'Israël en vertu du droit international. La Suisse souligne qu'Israël, en tant que puissance occupante, est responsable du maintien de l'ordre en Cisjordanie et d'assurer la protection et le bien-être de la population, qui comprend la réalisation de leurs droits fondamentaux. Nous exhortons les autorités israéliennes à traduire en justice tous les auteurs de violences envers les civils et de destruction délibérée de biens et infrastructures civiles. Nous le rappellerons inlassablement, tout acte de violence à l'encontre de civils, israéliens et palestiniens, est inacceptable. Le droit international doit être respecté en tant que première étape essentielle sur le chemin de la paix. Ce chemin doit aboutir à la solution négociée à deux États, Israël et la Palestine, dont Gaza fait partie intégrante, et vivant côte à côte en paix et en sécurité à l'intérieur de frontières sûres et reconnues. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland, and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, presidente, y agradezco a los oradores por sus exposiciones informativas, a la presidencia por convocarnos de manera rápida y eficiente, respondiendo a pedidos de varias delegaciones. Le felicito además por asumir la presidencia y le ofrezco todo el apoyo de esta delegación. El Ecuador condena enérgicamente el asesinato de los 6 rehenes israelíes cuyos cadáveres fueron encontrados en el sur de la franja el pasado fin de semana. El asesinato de rehenes es una grave violación de los derechos humanos y del derecho internacional. Los responsables deben ser llevados ante la justicia y pagar por sus actos. Mi país extiende sus condolencias a las familias de los rehenes muertos. Es imperativa la liberación de los 101 rehenes que permanecen en poder de Hamás desde su secuestro, producido durante los ataques terroristas perpetrados por ese grupo el pasado 7 de octubre, ataques que mi país deplora una vez más. Esta liberación de rehenes debe producirse de manera inmediata e incondicional. Es asimismo necesario un inmediato alto al fuego que permita mejorar las condiciones humanitarias cada vez más difíciles que enfrenta la población civil en Gaza y reducir las tensiones regionales. El Ecuador condena también los ataques contra civiles y personal humanitario. Es preciso detener la muerte y destrucción. En definitiva, lo sucedido hace evidente la necesidad de la implementación de la resolución 2735 de este Consejo sin excusas ni demoras artificiales. Para el efecto, las partes deben concluir ya sus negociaciones de buena fe, demostrando voluntad política y verdadera valentía. Este sería el menor homenaje al interés superior de los niños, palestinos e israelíes, quienes deben ser protegidos en todo momento, no lastimados y menos deliberadamente atacados. La campaña de vacunación contra el polio, que inició hace pocos días, es una muestra que con genuina voluntad política los resultados llegan. El Ecuador valora y agradece la labor de la OMS y de todas las agencias de Naciones Unidas que están involucradas en este esfuerzo. En cuanto a la situación de Cisjordania, la escalada de violencia y las grandes operaciones militares registradas en la zona en los últimos días hacen necesario reiterar los llamados hechos en repetidas ocasiones a actuar con contención y moderación, respetando en todo momento las disposiciones del derecho internacional humanitario. Se debe siempre recordar que los civiles y la infraestructura civil no pueden ser objeto de ataques y gozan de protección. Finalmente, señor presidente, es necesario detener las provocaciones y las declaraciones que exacerban la violencia. El status quo de los sitios sagrados de Jerusalén debe ser respetado. Es momento de actuar con responsabilidad. Gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Mr. President, allow me to firstly congratulate you on the assumption of the presidency of the Council. You have Guyana's full support, and I also extend our gratitude to the delegation of Sierra Leone for their excellent stewardship last month. I thank Under-Secretary General Di Carlo and Director Wasorno for the information provided. I also listened carefully to the moving words of Dr. Efrat Brun-Harlev and Ms. Yuli Novak. Mr. President, the arbitrary deprivation of an individual's liberty is one of the most egregious crimes. It is particularly repulsive because it attacks a person's dignity, especially when that individual, someone's mother, father, sister, brother, grandparent, or relative, is reduced to a bargaining chip. Guyana reiterates its strong condemnation of the taking of hostages during the 7th October attacks on Israel and underscores that such actions constitute a grave violation of international law, particularly Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions. On the same principle, Mr. President, we also demand the immediate release of all Palestinians arbitrarily detained in Israel. No life is more valuable than the other, and a crime is still a crime, regardless of the perpetrator. Mr. President, the people of Palestine continue to be deprived of their freedom and are now being dragged to the edge of the precipice. From all indications, they would be thrown over that precipice, except drastic measures are taken by this Council and by those countries with real influence to stop the aggressor. This is simply what is needed for the aggression of the occupying power against the Palestinian people to stop immediately and unconditionally. We should, however, not entertain the dangerous notion that the cessation of hostilities in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, to which those hostilities are now spreading, is a privilege we must implore the occupying power to grant to innocent civilians in Palestine. Neither should we entertain the equally dangerous notion that Israel has the right to defend itself in whatever manner it deems fit. On the contrary, Israel has both legal and moral obligations to end its hostilities in Gaza and the West Bank, and to take all actions to ensure the protection of civilians and the provision of essential goods and services for their survival. How many more briefings do we need to hear? And how many more tragic figures must we be apprised of before we take meaningful and decisive measures to stop the genocide of Palestinians? 86 days ago, this Council adopted Resolution 2735 with the fervent conviction that we were setting the stage for an early deal involving a ceasefire, the release of hostages, and a surge in humanitarian assistance. Sadly, in the 86 days since Resolution 2735 was adopted, the death toll in Gaza rose by over 3,600 and those injured by more than 9,500. These developments in Gaza are compounded by increasing violence and killing of Palestinian civilians in the West Bank. Things have only gotten worse for Palestinians, for the Israeli hostages, and indeed the entire region since the adoption of that resolution. The goalpost seems to be shifted at every turn, with Hamas and Israel accusing each other of obstructing progress in the negotiations, with a deal being seemingly elusive Guyana urges this Council to act swiftly to bring an end to the atrocities being meted out against Palestinian civilians. Mr. President, dear colleagues, as the UN prepares for the summit of the future, I am compelled to contemplate what the future means for Palestinians. With no visible horizon of hope, in a struggle older than these chambers, the future looks bleak. The occupying power sits at the head of the table of those enabling the cultivation of a culture of hatred between Israelis and Palestinians. While people on both sides suffer, politicians stoke discord for self-preservation. Let us call a spade, Mr. President. Who are the real benefactors of this ongoing war in Gaza? It is not right, moral, just, or legal to continue fueling this war, where those bearing the brunt are innocent women and children. Guyana believes that the majority of our leaders cannot comfortably adopt the Pact for the Future with its noble aspirations while turning a blind eye to the ongoing indiscriminate killings of Palestinians. History is already judging us, but this Council has the power and responsibility to turn this tide. Mr. President, it is worth reminding that the situation in Palestine today did not begin on 7th October 2023. We must cast our minds back to 1948, because it was in that year that Israel first violently rejected the two-state solution. Since then, that violent rejection has continued, manifested in cycles of war and ever-expanding settlement activities inter alia. What we have seen since 7th of October are the symptoms of this rejection of the two-state solution, with the victimizer capitalizing on the horrific events of September-October to carry out its own sinister motives, even amidst protests by its own citizens. Again, Mr. President, let us call a spade a spade. Over these last few days, the names of the hostages whose bodies were recovered have been repeated, and we have come to know a bit about their lives. It is the least that we could do to honor their memory and the tragic circumstances under which they died. This compelled me to also contemplate the thousands of innocent Palestinians who were killed since 7th of October, whose names could not all be mentioned, lest we took a day for every 10,000 persons killed. Guyana believes, though, that the best way to honor the memory of both Palestinians and Israelis who have died in this war is for this Council to take immediate action to end this war. We have the tools at our disposal. Let us use them. In conclusion, Mr. President, while each briefing is a grotesque recollection of all the horrors of the war, it must be more than that. It must be a call to action. To which the Council responds decisively, substantively, and effectively. While Plato asserted that only the dead have seen the end of war, this Council can ensure that remaining generations of Palestinians and Israelis also see and experience the end of war, and more than that, experience sustainable peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to express our gratitude to Sierra Leone for their successful presidency in August, and wish Slovenia, the president for this month, the best of luck. Let me also thank USG DiCarlo, Director Wilson, Dr. Braun-Harlev, and Ms. Novak for their respective briefings. We are almost 11 months into this devastating conflict, and yet violence and tragedies in Gaza are never ending. The news that 6 hostages held by Hamas were found dead is truly heartbreaking. Japan is deeply saddened and outraged by the murder of these innocent hostages, and we express our sincere condolences to their bereaved families and loved ones. It is inhumane and totally unacceptable to use hostages' lives as bargaining chips. Hamas must release all remaining hostages immediately. Turning to the overall situation in Gaza, Japan remains appalled by the ever-increasing civilian casualties, mostly women and children, the massive displacement, and the worsening humanitarian situation due to the relentless hostilities. We welcome the successful implementation of the first few days of the polio vaccination campaign under the temporary pauses, and we are relieved to hear that more than 180,000 children have been vaccinated so far. The brave efforts and dedication of the relevant UN agencies, despite the extremely difficult conditions, are commendable. However, the suffering of Palestinians and the desperate situation in Gaza will remain the same as long as the fighting continues. Nowhere is safe. People are compressed into ever smaller areas by the repeated evacuation orders. There are critical shortages of food, medicine, clean water, and other basic necessities. Public order has collapsed, further threatening the well-being of the population and creating challenges to the work of aid workers. In short, the civilians are paying the highest price of the conflict. Japan reiterates that all parties must strictly abide by the relevant principles of international humanitarian law. Most importantly, the protection of civilians, and must secure the safe and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid. Mr. President, while our eyes are on Gaza, Japan is also seriously concerned about the deteriorating situation in the West Bank. We deeply regret the continuing settlement activities and condemn extreme settler violence committed against Palestinians. Most recently, the ongoing large-scale Israeli military operations in the West Bank and their ramifications are alarming. Mr. President, in the inflamed Middle East, one thing that can relieve tensions in the region is a deal that brings the hostages home, achieves an immediate ceasefire, and expands the delivery of humanitarian aid at scale throughout Gaza. In this regard, Japan strongly supports the tireless diplomatic efforts by the US, Egypt, and Qatar, and urges both parties, especially Hamas, to swiftly conclude the deal in accordance with the Security Council Resolution 2735. All parties must prioritize to end the agony of innocent civilians rather than focusing on political gains. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank you for convening this meeting at the request of the State of Israel, supported by the delegations of France, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and separately requested by the delegation of Algeria to discuss various issues related to the conflict in Gaza. I thank the briefers, Under Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo and Director Idem Wasuno for their important briefings. And I thank Dr. Ifred Born-Halev and Ms. Yul Novak for the information provided. Sierra Leone congratulates Slovenia on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month, and we wish you, Mr. President, and your team the very best. I assure you of our fullest support. Let me also thank all Council members for their support during our presidency in August. Mr. President, one of the consequences of the heinous attack of 7th October 2023 on Israeli civilians was the taking of about 250 hostages by Hamas and other armed groups, an act that contravenes international law, including the 4th Geneva Convention, which explicitly prohibits hostage taking as a grave breach of international humanitarian law. This prohibition is reaffirmed under the International Committee of the Red Cross Rule 96 of the customary international humanitarian law. Sierra Leone, since the 7th of October 2023, condemned and has repeatedly condemned this act in the strongest terms and calls for the immediate and unconditional release of all remaining hostages held by Hamas. Therefore, it is deeply concerning to note the content of the identical letter dated 1st September 2024, addressed to the Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the Security Council, from the permanent representative of Israel to the United Nations, informing of the discovery of, and I quote, bodies of 6 Israeli hostages held in the tunnels of Hamas since 7th October 2023, with 101 hostages still unaccounted for by Hamas, end of quote. This tragic loss, combined with the prolonged suffering of the remaining hostages in worsening, unpredictable, and unknown conditions without any humanitarian access, underscore the need for impartial, independent investigations and accountability for those responsible. In this regard, Sierra Leone continues to support the work of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, since he announced the opening of investigations into the situation in the state of Palestine, following pre-trial Chamber 1's decision that the ICC could exercise its criminal jurisdiction in the situation, covering the territorial scope of Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Mr. President, with all the tragedies unfolding since 7th October last year, civilians have been at the center of it all, as they unwillingly carry a burden too grievous to bear. The humanitarian situation still reveals the harsh realities in the Gaza Strip, as indiscriminate attacks, collective punishment, blockade, hunger and disease, and displacement push civilians towards and beyond the brink of human dignity and civilization. The reemergence of the once eradicated polio in Gaza owing to the disruption to child vaccination programs, as well as massive damage to the water and sanitation systems caused by the war, is only but one of the consequences. However, and amidst this atmosphere of high tension and risk, we welcome the area-specific humanitarian pauses that allow for the rollout of the first phase of the polio vaccination campaign in central Gaza. The joint effort demonstrated by the WHO, UNICEF, UNRWA, and other partners reinforces the selfless nature of the humanitarian personnel in the field. We reiterate the appeal to the relevant parties to the conflict to respect the temporary pauses and work towards achieving the long overdue lasting ceasefire. Mr. President, turning to the West Bank, Sierra Leone is deeply concerned over the large-scale operations in the West Bank by the Israeli security forces since the 27th August 2024. We regret that 29 deaths and 50 injuries have been reported as of 1st September 2024 as casualties from the West Bank governorate of Jenin, Tubas, Tukarem. We welcome withdrawal of Israeli forces from Tukarem and Tubas and implore them to do the same in Jenin, an area where they have instituted a curfew, which, as reported, is seriously affecting the residents and their access to essential services. The 19th July 2024 advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice has made it clear in its determination, amongst others, that, and I quote, Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful, and that Israel is under obligation to bring to an end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible, end of quote. Sierra Leone can only urge the State of Israel to comply, and for the United Nations, including the General Assembly and this Security Council, to work on the modalities for the immediate implementation of the advisory opinion. Mr. President, at this point in the conflict, it is evident that the civilians in the Gaza Strip can no longer endure the untold suffering being inflicted on them. Can we for once consider the sanctity and priceless nature of a single human life, let alone the over 40,000 civilians who have been lost and 94,224 injured in Gaza? With this in mind, Sierra Leone would make the following points. Firstly, we call on the relevant parties to this conflict to implement the resolution of the Security Council, including 2735, which, with the passage of time, would require further action by this Council. We urge the parties to respond to the mediation efforts in good faith from Egypt, Qatar, and the United States by committing to an immediate cessation of hostilities and are agreeing to a deal that will facilitate the exchange of hostages and prisoners, provide substantial humanitarian aid, and establish a permanent ceasefire. Secondly, in seeking to address the reported sticking point in the ongoing negotiations, we call on the parties to the conflict to explore feasible options, including the proposal that has been put forward by the UN Secretary General on security guarantees in Gaza and for Israel. Thirdly, we continue to remind the relevant parties of their obligations to respect and comply with international law, in particular international humanitarian law. Fourthly, and as part of the future outlook, Sierra Leone reaffirms its commitment to the political horizon of the two-state solution, where the two states, Israel and Palestine, coexist peacefully within secure and recognized borders. We therefore reiterate our rejection of statements and actions of the conflicting parties that incite or undermine efforts towards the peaceful solution of this prolonged conflict. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by stating that upholding human dignity and the rule of law is a shared global responsibility. Therefore, Sierra Leone reiterates its condemnation of all acts of violence against civilians and call for independent and impartial investigations that will lead to accountability to end impunity, recognizing the critical nexus between peace and justice. My delegation therefore stands ready to steadfastly pursue any initiative that will advance the peace process between Israel and Palestine. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. Since this is the first meeting of this Council this month, let me congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council. I also thank Sierra Leone for steering its work during the month of August in an efficient and professional manner. I thank Undersecretary DiCarlo, the OSHA Director Ada Mosorno, and other briefers for their insightful remarks and sobering briefings. It is gravely alarming that with each briefing this Council receives, the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel steadily worsens. We are deeply saddened and appalled by and condemn the killing of the 6 Israeli hostages held captive by Hamas and extend our sincere condolences to their families and friends. Our thoughts are with you and with the families of those whose loved ones are still held hostage, including children. We remain concerned about the reports of sexual violence targeting the hostages and the dire conditions in which they are held in, which we wholly condemn. Equally worrying are Hamas's recent announcements that hostages are to be killed should the Israeli Defense Forces close in on them. The protection and upholding of human rights is paramount, and the rights of the hostages are to be safeguarded at all costs. As we have said many times in this chamber, Malta reiterates its unreserved condemnation of the 7th October terror attacks and the ensuing killings and hostage-taking committed by Hamas and other armed groups, and remind that hostage-taking is a grave violation of international law. We demand, yet again, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Humanitarian access to the hostages must also be facilitated. These are demands which this Council has consistently repeated since 7th October and has enshrined in resolutions 2712, 2720, 2728, and 2735. At the same time, we must also highlight the dire situation of arbitrarily detained Palestinians suffering decrepit conditions in Israeli detention. Individuals forcibly detained and imprisoned without charge must be released, and independent investigations into allegations of torture need to take place. An immediate and permanent ceasefire remains the only clear path through which the bloodshed and suffering on both sides can finally be put to an end. The urgency of a ceasefire is undeniable in the face of a situation in Gaza, which is catastrophic, with civilians bearing the brunt of the conflict. We call on the parties to prioritize dialogue and agree to the terms of a ceasefire in line with Resolution 2735. Malta welcomes news that polio inoculations for children in Gaza are well underway, with over 187,000 vaccinated. We commend the parties involved in the logistics of this campaign, including the WHO, UNRWA, and other partners. Amid conditions fraught with peril on every front, Gazan children deserve to be protected from this additional health risk. However, we stress that other relentless threats to their lives must also be addressed. Reports of children being killed or admitted to besieged hospitals with shrapnel injuries due to shelling in densely populated residential area persist. Children are neither a target nor collateral damage. Their special protection under international law are clear and need to be urgently adhered to by all parties. With conditions of food insecurity, severe water and sanitation deficiencies, and a devastated health system brought about as a direct result of Israel's military campaign, additional threats are always imminent. Efforts to address the colossal humanitarian needs of Gazan civilian population must be adequately accelerated and conducted without conditions or impediments. President, the situation in the occupied West Bank is also of grave concern. The past week has seen alarming violence across the West Bank, including in Jenin, due to intensified military operations, airstrikes, armed clashes, and settler violence. This latest surge in violence has already resulted in many deaths and injuries and is threatening to push the West Bank over the edge. An escalation on that front must be prevented at all costs. We call for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure to be prioritized. The West Bank cannot turn into another Gaza. Amid the continued risk of a regional escalation, we also continue to emphasize the urgent need for a rapid reduction in tensions and actions which can exacerbate the flammable situation. Parties need to urgently resort to dialogue and diplomacy and secure a ceasefire. This is the only way to address immediate-term priorities in Gaza and the West Bank, release the hostages, and ensure a credible and irreversible political horizon for a comprehensive realization of the two-state solution. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique wishes to extend our sincere and warmest congratulations to you, Mr. President, and to your country, the Republic of Slovenia, for assuming the presidency of the Security Council. We pledge our fullest support in the discharge of your heavy responsibilities. We highly praise Sierra Leone for their remarkable and successful presidency in the month of August. We are grateful to the briefers, to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, to Ms. Edem Osorno, OCHA Director of Operations and Advocacy, to Dr. Efrat Bronhalev, Director of Schneider Children's Medical Center, and Ms. Yuli Novak, Israeli human rights activist and Executive Director of B'Tselem. Their briefings to the Council have been most valuable and illuminating. Mr. President, after 11 months of war, the situation in Gaza Strip remains a matter of grave concern. The conflict rages on, and it has been impacting enormously and negatively on the lives of civilians, including those in captivity. Hostages and Gazan population are facing immense suffering, uncertainty, and without any prospect or ray of hope. Attacks on refugee camps and towns in the West Bank are a near daily occurrence, and they have been intensifying. Since October 2023, when the current hostilities erupted, Mozambique and, in fact, other members of this council and the entire international community have been calling for the protection of civilians and respect for international humanitarian law being systematically violated by the warring parties in Gaza. We consider it imperative that all parties scrupulously comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law, in particular with regard to the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructures. Mr. President, the endemic prevalence of violence in Gaza and Palestine in general has been a clear indication of the need for this Security Council to redouble its efforts towards achieving a lasting peace. It is therefore imperative that this conflict ceases immediately. Acknowledging the danger of the continued current situation, we underscore the critical need for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza to de-escalate the ongoing conflict. We emphasize the importance of releasing hostages, increasing humanitarian aid, and returning to diplomatic efforts to reach a lasting solution. In this context, Mozambique reiterates the call for a genuine and meaningful effort for peace, understanding, and cooperation in the Middle East. The central goal must be that of achieving a two-state solution. This is the sole basis on which Israel and Palestine can live together and prosper side by side in peace and security as two independent and sovereign states, both as members of the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, at the outset, I join others in commending the work accomplished by Sierra Leone during its presidency in August. I also extend my congratulations to you, Mr. President, on assuming the presidency for September, and wish you a productive term ahead. I would like also to thank USG, the DiCarlo, and the Director Wasornu of OCHA, as well as CSO briefers for their sobering and extremely painful briefings. Mr. President, our calls in this Council for the release of all hostages taken by Hamas and the other groups have been clear and steadfast. However, this voice has not been heeded, and we are devastated to hear the tragic news of the killing of 6 hostages held in Gaza. We extend our deep condolences to their families. The taking and execution of hostages are strictly prohibited under international humanitarian law. These acts can never never be justified under any circumstances and must be unequivocally condemned. We once again urge Hamas to immediately release all remaining hostages. During the Security Council Area Formula meeting in May on Israeli hostages, we heard the agonizing story of Carmel Gat from a member of her family, Mr. Roman, and this makes our anguish deeper. We also feel heartbroken to hear that 3 of those 6 killed hostages were slated to be released in the first phase of the ceasefire deal still on the table. If the deal for the ceasefire and the release of hostages had been finalized earlier, these innocent people could have been reunited with their families. Thus, however difficult the negotiating process is, parties to this conflict must faithfully participate in the talks without adding more conditions that may lengthen the negotiations. Efforts by mediators, US, Egypt, and Qatar, which we greatly value, should also continue. Every day, every hour, and every minute is directly linked to the fate of numerous lives. Delaying the ceasefire without any absolute reasons may amount to a criminal act. We are appalled by the ongoing killing of innocent civilians, including hostages, and also deteriorating humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. No signs of improvements on the humanitarian front are being seen as strikes on shelters, forced displacement, hunger, and disease continue to cruelly torment innocent families. As discussed last week, a widespread outbreak of polio should not compound the already disastrous situation in Gaza. Thus, we highly appreciate the relentless efforts by selfless humanitarian actors for the mass polio vaccination campaign that is going on under constant insecurity. Humanitarian pauses to ensure the success of the vaccination must be strictly upheld by both parties. Failure to prevent the spread of polio in Gaza will have fatal impacts in the wider region, including Israel. Mr. President, amid the ongoing hostilities in Gaza, we are also extremely troubled by the continuous instability and violence in the West Bank, another occupied territory. We are particularly worried by the widespread military operations by the Israeli security forces all across the West Bank, including airstrikes and the targeting of civilian infrastructure in Jenin. At the same time, Hamas and Palestinian Jihad, Islamic Jihad should cease any future terrorist attempts. Ongoing violence and terrorism in tandem with expanded settlement activity is not only threatening the lives and the livelihoods of Palestinian civilians in the West Bank, but also seriously undermining and hampering the way forward to the vision of the two-state solution, which is clearly provided by Resolution 2735 and is fully supported and encouraged by nearly all UN member states. In order to make this common aspiration a reality in the future, not just words on paper, any acts or rhetoric that hinder its realization should now be prohibited and avoided as much as possible. Mr. President, Israel should ban and refrain from illegal settlement activities, as well as inflammatory rhetoric that are inconsistent with the Security Council Resolution 2334. On the other hand, Palestinian Authority should be equipped with able leadership and overhaul its governance in order to truly lay the ground for the two-state solution. The Republic of Korea will constructively participate in any further discussions in the Security Council as well as in the General Assembly toward this common aspiration. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
主席，首先我要祝贺斯洛文尼亚担任安理会本月轮值主席。中国代表团将全力支持你和你同事的工作。我也赞赏塞拉利昂完成上个月安理会主席的工作。 我感谢迪卡洛副秘书长、我 SONO 主任以及2位民间社会通报人的通报。主席，6名人质在加沙遇难，令人痛惜。他们的不幸遭遇令人同情。中方谴责一切针对平民的暴力，反对一切违反国际法和国际人道法的行为。我们再次呼吁加大外交努力，推动所有被扣押人员，无论是以色列人还是巴勒斯坦人，都尽快获释，早日回家。残酷的事实充分说明，试图通过延长战争取得完全胜利，不过是一厢情愿。武力不会为解救人质创造有利条件，只会加剧仇恨和矛盾，使对抗更加激烈，局势更加动荡。以色列领导人应该倾听人民的强烈呼声，把解救人质、拯救生命作为最优先的目标，为实现停火、结束战争做出最大努力。我们呼吁对当事方有重要影响的国家拿出真诚负责的态度，为平息加沙战火采取切实行动。每一个人的生命都是宝贵的，都不应该被剥夺活下去的权利。我们赞赏世卫组织等人道机构克服困难，为加沙儿童开展脊髓灰质炎疫苗接种。加沙的儿童和世界其他地区的儿童一样，享有健康成长的权利。他们期盼安全的环境、充足的食物和美好的童年，不应在接种疫苗后继续面临枪林弹雨的死亡威胁。主席，下周加沙冲突爆发即将满11个月。尽管国际社会一再做出努力，持续发出停火止战呼声，但局势仍没有缓和降温的迹象。与此同时，除加沙之外，目前约旦河西岸的局势也在持续升级。国际社会绝不能让加沙的人道惨剧在约旦河西岸上演。中方敦促各方，特别是以色列，保持冷静克制，履行占领方义务，停止定居点活动，停止对约旦河西岸的袭击，尊重和维护耶路撒冷宗教圣地历史形成的现状。这场战争已经打得太久了，停火谈判已经拖得太久了，普通民众的苦难已经持续得太久了，一切都该结束了。我们支持安理会为推动落实有关决议，早日平息战火，缓解人道灾难，采取进一步的行动。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Прежде чем я начну свое выступление, я хотел бы, как и мои коллеги, пожелать вам удачного председательства в Совете в текущем месяце. Вы можете рассчитывать на нашу поддержку, а также отдать должное нашим сьерра-леонским коллегам за весьма успешное председательство в прошлом месяце. Господин председатель, благодарим заместителя генсекретаря ООН Розмари Ди Карло и директора по операциям Управления ООН по координации гуманитарных вопросов Идем Вассорну за обстоятельные брифинги по данным вопросам. Внимательно выслушали докладчиков от гражданского общества. Из их выступлений понятно, что нынешний виток обострения палестино-израильского конфликта приобретает все более мрачные и уродливые очертания. Мы все были потрясены, узнав о гибели в Нусайрате 6 заложников, включая российского гражданина Александра Лобанова. Выражаем глубокие соболезнования семьям и родственникам погибших. Подобным действиям нет и не может быть оправдания. Мы говорили об этом с самого начала. Мы также с самого начала призывали приоритизировать вопрос освобождения заложников, добиться которого, как мы все прекрасно понимаем, возможно только в случае немедленного прекращения огня в Газе. Сейчас не время рассуждать о том, почему палестино-израильский конфликт дошел до такого момента, когда в подземельях Газы гибнут ни в чем не повинные израильтяне, а на поверхности палестинские женщины и дети. Каждый из нас много раз давал этому свои оценки. Сейчас время действовать. Если в Совете более или менее сложилось понимание о том, что необходимо сделать, и принятая 10 июня резолюция 2735 при всех ее недостатках в целом это понимание отражает, то израильское руководство упорно ищет военное решение этой проблемы, пытаясь игнорировать решение Совета Безопасности. В результате в Газе при попытках их освободить, по имеющимся данным, погибло уже как минимум несколько десятков израильских заложников, которые попросту не дождались прекращения огня. Оценку этой ситуации после гибели 6 заложников в Нусайрате в полной мере дало израильское общество. Буквально вся страна в едином порыве потребовала от израильского правительства безотлагательно заключить сделку с Хамас, которая позволила бы освободить остальных заложников. Требуем этого и все мы, однако в Западном Иерусалиме к этим требованиям остаются глухи. Господин председатель, сегодня мы скорбим не только по погибшим израильтянам, но и по всем погибшим в Газе, будь то израильтяне, палестинцы или граждане других стран. Каждый день бездействия Совета Безопасности ООН, который никак не может принудить стороны к прекращению огня, имеет чудовищную кровавую цену, которую своими жизнями платят мирные жители. Как бы мы ни относились к событиям 7 октября, мы не можем закрывать глаза на то, что за 11 месяцев эскалации в секторе жертвами коллективного наказания со стороны Израиля стали более 40 тысяч палестинцев. И это число продолжает увеличиваться с каждым днем. В Газе царит насилие и беззаконие. Отмечаем крайне тревожные сообщения о нарушении МГП израильской стороной, в частности, обстрелы гуманитарных конвоев, а также массовые захоронения убитых палестинцев со следами пыток и изъятий внутренних органов. Все эти инциденты, как и гибель заложников, необходимо тщательно расследовать, причем в международном формате. Для всех нас очевидно, что с каждым днем израильской операции в секторе Газа шансов выжить у пленных все меньше. Совет Безопасности един в понимании того, что освобождение оставшихся израильтян и иностранцев военным путем невозможно, и переговорам нет альтернативы. Это четко осознает и израильское общество. Однако руководство Израиля, к сожалению, до сих пор рассматривает переговоры лишь в качестве дымовой завесы, позволяющей отвлечь внимание международного сообщества от силового решения палестинского вопроса. Об этом говорят не только действия Западного Иерусалима на земле, но и последние выступления премьер-министра Нетаньяху, заявляющего, что он не остановит боевые действия в секторе. По-прежнему не видим никаких признаков того, что военный кабинет Израиля готов изменить этот курс. Почти у всех членов Совета Безопасности это вызывает стремление действовать в соответствии с уставом ООН и заставить страны выполнять решения Совета Безопасности ООН. Соответствующий инструментарий Совета есть. Нужна лишь политическая воля и единство по этому вопросу. К сожалению, добиться его нам не позволяют наши американские коллеги, которые продолжают последовательно покрывать действия Израиля, поставлять ему оружие и, соответственно, побуждать его продолжать силовую операцию в Газе. Поэтому неудивительно, что мы все становимся свидетелями того, как растут аппетиты Западного Иерусалима, выдвигающего все новые и новые условия для заключения сделки, параметры которой были одобрены Советом Безопасности в резолюции 2735. Так, если изначально речь шла о полном выводе израильских войск из анклава, то сейчас Израиль настаивает на сохранении своего присутствия в Филадельфийском коридоре и на линии Нецарим. Совет Безопасности давал согласие на совершенно другие параметры договоренностей, а значит, эти требования – прямое нарушение положений, упомянутой резолюции Совета Безопасности. Американские же посредники, к сожалению, откровенно подыгрывают своему союзнику в его последовательном нарушении резолюции Совета Безопасности ООН. На каждом заседании они пытаются убедить Совет надавить на Хамас, утверждая, что сделка уже не за горами. При этом тот факт, что Израиль так и не дал согласия на сделку в параметрах резолюции 2735 и на ходу пытается ее модифицировать, наши американские коллеги лукаво оставляют за скобками. В итоге, пока Совет Безопасности фактически по-прежнему находится в заложниках у США, угрожающих заблокировать любую резолюцию с четким требованием полноценного прекращения огня, и вынужден ограничиваться декларативными заявлениями в пользу скорейшего заключения сделки между Хамас и Израилем. В этих условиях закономерно провисают и все гуманитарные усилия Совета. Как неоднократно подчеркивали сами гуманитарщики, в отсутствие прекращения огня они попросту не работают. На этом фоне израильские военные планомерно зачищают не только Газу, но и западный берег реки Иордан. Рейды израильской армии в городах Дженин, Тубас и Туль-Карм говорят об одном. Безопасности для палестинцев уже нет нигде, ни в Газе, ни на западном берегу реки Иордан, где с начала эскалации погибло почти 700 человек. Только в августе зафиксировано более 1000 случаев нападений израильских силовиков и поселенцев на гражданское население западного берега. По данным «Врачей без границ», израильские военные препятствуют доступу пострадавших в медицинские учреждения, а также проезду автомобилей скорой помощи. При этом одно из наиболее высокопоставленных израильских официальных лиц, министр национальной безопасности Бен-Гвир, призывает перейти к практике коллективного наказания и расстрелу палестинских заключенных, а также установлению множества блокпостов на западном берегу реки Иордан с целью затруднения движения местных жителей. Палестинцев он прямо называет не иначе, как животными. Более того, израильским кабинетом, как известно, утверждены новые планы по строительству поселений на западном берегу. То есть принято решение продолжить действия, которые осуждают все члены Совета Безопасности и подавляющее большинство членов международного сообщества. Эту ситуацию нельзя воспринимать иначе, как вопиющее пренебрежение международным правом и теми принципами, на которых выстраивается общепринятая международно-правовая основа палестино-израильского регулирования. Господин председатель, Совет не может позволить себе и дальше бездействовать перед лицом происходящего в Газе и на западном берегу. Мы дали переговорщикам, пытающимся добиться сделки между Израилем и Хамас на параметрах, утвержденных резолюцией Совета Безопасности 2735, уже 3 месяца на то, чтобы убедить обе стороны ее принять. Этого более чем достаточно. Сейчас мы видим, что переговорный процесс в свете новых израильских требований приобретает затяжной и непредсказуемый характер. Тем, кто защищает Западный Иерусалим, нужно найти в себе мужество не на словах, а на деле выполнить свои обязанности ответственного члена международного сообщества и постоянного члена Совета Безопасности ООН. И вместе со всеми нами не только потребовать прекращения бесчеловечной бойни в Газе, но и предпринять для этого конкретные шаги, предусмотренные Уставом ООН. Только это позволит спасти и остающихся в живых израильских заложников, и десятки, если не сотни тысяч мирных палестинцев, вынужденных противостоять безжалостной израильской военной машине. Мир ждет. Время дипломатических игр прошло. Настало время реальных и практических действий. И чем раньше вы это осознаете, тем лучше для вас. Благодарю за внимание.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Slovenia. I join in thanking others, to all briefers today for their contribution to today's discussion. Colleagues, there is a sense of outrage felt around the globe. Outrage in Palestine that the international community is failing them. Outrage on Israeli streets that the hostages continue being held in Gaza. Outrage of the global public that this war does not stop. The Slovenian public expressed its outrage this week over parallel realities, criticizing the political reality of our ongoing debates without solutions. Let me be clear that parallel realities exist, a reality of decades-long suffering and human rights violations of the Palestinian people, a reality of security concerns of the Israeli people, but also a reality of regional instability, which is a threat to international peace and security. There is only one possible common denominator for these realities, which is peace. We therefore repeat our strong call for an immediate ceasefire. Only a ceasefire will alleviate the suffering of hostages and their family members and friends. We repeat our condemnation of the 7 October attack carried out by Hamas and other armed groups and the taking of hostages. We call for full access of ICRC to the hostages and for their immediate release. We are shocked by the death of hostages whose bodies were rescued on Saturday and unequivocally condemn their killing. We offer our condolences to their loved ones. The suffering of hostages should not be a bargaining chip for negotiations. Only a ceasefire will alleviate the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. Another briefing in less than a week is a clear demonstration that the situation is deteriorating. We welcome the start of the polio vaccination campaign carried out by WHO, UNICEF, and UNRWA in Gaza. This should be a turning page in ensuring unimpeded, sustained humanitarian access for aid delivery at scale, as well as restoring essential services. We take this opportunity to repeat our concern over the rapidly deteriorating situation in the West Bank with concerning destructive parallels. We reiterate our appeals from last week. There must be an immediate end to the operations, further fueling violence, tensions, and human rights violations in the West Bank. We repeat our call for full adherence to the international humanitarian and human rights law by all parties. The ICJ provisional measures and Security Council resolution must be fully implemented. Protection of civilians and alleviation of their suffering should not be a bargaining chip for negotiations. What should be a part of negotiations is the pursuit of a just and lasting peace. We call on all to recalibrate their interests and place the interest of peace and protection of all civilians, Palestinians and Israelis alike, first. They must recommit to and finalize the agreement set out by this Council Resolution 2735. Colleagues, in a world of parallel realities, it is our job to push for peace. We therefore believe the Council should proceed with two steps: a strong united call for a conclusion of ceasefire negotiations led by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, and a focused discussion on the peace process leading us to the two-state solution. Members of this Council have consistently voiced their strong support for the two-state solution, both through statements as well as in resolutions. It is now time to reflect on providing a clear framework on how to reach a point of convergence on the horizon. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. The representative, the representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to respond very briefly to my Russian colleagues' remarks. First and foremost, I'm very glad to hear my Russian colleague pledge support for the UN Charter. Thus, I hope that means that Russia will be soon pulling its troops out of Ukraine and ending its war of aggression. Look, my second last point is it's a call, an urging for council members and other states represented in this room who have influence with Hamas to use it by calling on Hamas to accept immediately the ceasefire and hostage deal. And being very frank, the sooner that you do this, the sooner we are likely to see an end to this tragic war in Gaza. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their further statement, and the representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make further statements. I give him the floor.
Я хотел бы заверить нашего американского коллегу, что мы, безусловно, выведем войска из Украины после того, как добьемся всех целей нашей специальной военной операции. Мы неоднократно говорили, что предпочли бы сделать это мирным путем, дипломатическим, но, к сожалению, нынешнее развитие событий не позволяет это сделать, в том числе и из-за усилий Соединенных Штатов, которые продолжают поддерживать нелегитимный киевский режим. Что касается ситуации вокруг Газы, то вы, конечно, можете спорить со мной, я не возражаю против этого, но сложно спорить с фактами. Факты, как известно, упрямая вещь. И вы действительно уже 3 месяца заверяете нас в том, что сделка не за горами, сделки до сих пор нет, и вы до сих пор не потрудились, уважаемый коллега, объяснить членам Совета, каким образом на данный момент подвергаются модификации те параметры сделки, которые были утверждены в резолюции Совета 2735. Я уже 3-й раз обращаюсь к вам с этим требованием, но вы пытаетесь его не услышать. Надеюсь, что 3-го раза достаточно. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize for taking the floor once again. I addressed this issue. Other U.S. colleagues have addressed this issue before. I think everybody knows the difficulties of trying to reach this agreement, this hostage ceasefire agreement. So for me to sit here and once again spell these issues out, I'm not going to do that. But again, I'm going to say that as Ambassador Thomas Greenfield said here just moments ago, the diplomacy takes time. This is not easy. If it were easy, it would have been solved by now. So we're going to continue to work at this. We're not going to continue to cast blame, as some on this council like to do every time they come in the chamber. We're going to do the hard work of trying to get this deal done. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I now give the floor to first I should say the representative of the Russian Federation has asked to make further statement, and I give them the floor.
Я бы хотел поблагодарить американского коллегу за разъяснение и спросить, означают ли ваши слова, что вы поддерживаете коллективные усилия Совета, которые должны быть предприняты для того, чтобы добиться выполнения уже принятых резолюций, в том числе резолюции 2735, задействование всего инструментария, который имеется для этого у Совета Безопасности.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. I would propose that we move on in our agenda. I now give the floor to the representative of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, I thank you and the Slovenian presidency of the Security Council for your swift response to the request by Algeria to convene this meeting in light of the further deterioration of the grave situation and rising civilian casualties in occupied Palestine, both in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, at the hands of the illegal Israeli occupation. We also listened very carefully to the statements of the briefers. Mr. President, members of the Council, Israel has unleashed a full-fledged war against the Palestinian people. Israel is seeking to impose a military solution to the conflict by disappearing a nation. There is no denying these facts. From genocide to apartheid, Israel is showing the world its willingness and readiness to use the most despicable means to achieve its colonial aims. Disposition, displacement, devastation, destruction, death. That is what it has been inflicting on Palestinians for decades. But our people are enduring them today at a scale never experienced since the Nakba. Instead of ending the Nakba, Israeli fascist extremist leaders have decided to try to bring it to its ultimate conclusion: Palestine with no Palestinians. We should all know by now that action by the Israeli occupying authorities. Criticism and concerns alone have no bearing on a fanatical government intent on committing the worst crimes over and over and over again. No one here is naive enough to believe that Israel will correct course on its own, will suddenly respect international law. You know the law. You know that Israel is breaching it flagrantly and shamelessly every single day. You have condemned, called, urged, demanded, to no avail. It is time for resolute action. And I totally agree with you, Mr. President, when you described the tremendous amount of frustration, especially among the Palestinian people, for seeing the Security Council and the international community failing them. How can anyone justify sending weapons to an army listed for its crimes against our children, or provide any kind of support to a government that is pursuing annexation and genocide, denying the right of our people to self-determination, and denying our nation and those comprising it their right to life? It cannot be justified. So do not. No arms, no money, no trade, no shield to help Israel commit its crimes against the Palestinian people. In other words, no complicity. You cannot give inoculation and give weapons to kill the children that you inoculate against polio. Measures, sanctions, warrants, arrests, accountability. In other words, no impunity. That is the only way forward. Mr. President, in recent days, Israel has killed over 30 Palestinians in the West Bank. Among them, 6 children and 2 elderly people. It has destroyed refugee camps and civilian infrastructure, and besieged and attacked hospitals and carried out countless airstrikes. Jenin is a vivid example. The number of Palestinians killed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, since last October stands at around 700, including over 150 children, with the number of injuries at 6,000 people. Over 3,300 Palestinians have been displaced, and over 12,000 people have been arbitrarily detained. Hostages endured a never-ending nightmare. In parallel, Israel is advancing its settler colonial agenda, with more and more settlers installed and more Palestinians displaced. Violence by settlers and soldiers is spreading like wildfire to push people out of their homeland. Israel wants you to believe its military aggression is about security. But it knows by experience that it is actually creating the conditions of insecurity. No one is naive enough to ignore what this is about. It is about the land. All Palestinians are guilty of being Palestinians and for wanting to live on their land, the land of their ancestors. Their sentence, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, arbitrary detention or death. How long will they have to suffer such a terrifying fate? Should we all pretend that we did not see the Knesset vote against a Palestinian state? That we did not see the terror against Israeli settlers are perpetrating? That we did not see the Palestinian people displaced over and over again? That we did not see the mass killings and destruction? That we did not see the map praised by Netanyahu where Palestine was disappeared? That we did not hear an ambassador sitting around this table when he called the Security Council Resolution 2334 an quote-unquote evil decree, claiming those who respect international law and the authority of this council are terrorists? Should we pretend we don't see how fanatic, how murderous, how crazy, how contemptuous this Israeli government is? Should we pretend that we never heard of the UN Charter, of the Security Council and General Assembly resolutions, of the ICJ orders and advisory opinions, of the ICC, of every single body ever established to uphold the rule of law? Should we just ignore their unequivocal determinations regarding Israelis' unlawful actions, their demands for a halt to its human rights violations and war crimes? Should we allow Israel to continue its genocide against the Palestinian people while pretending to negotiate a ceasefire? Don't listen to me. Listen to the families of the Israeli hostages. I'm sure that all of you have been watching CNN, BBC, and others for the last few days. What the Israeli families are saying, what the entire Israeli population are doing, including in Tel Aviv and hundreds of thousands of people. They know Netanyahu does not care about the hostages, that's what they say, and does not want a deal. They know that so-called military pressure means genocide against innocent Palestinians and certain death for Israeli hostages. We said months ago, we need to spare civilian lives, Palestinian and Israeli. I repeat, we said months ago in many of our statements, we need to spare civilian lives, Palestinian and Israelis. We said months ago we wanted to see Palestinian and Israeli families reunited in life, not in death. But Israelis' colonial plans require death to prevail on both sides, to convince everyone there is no solution possible, to ensure that there can be no two states, no two peoples coexisting side by side. We must not let them prevail. I repeat, we must not let them prevail, or we will all pay the price. Mr. President, Palestinians in Gaza have endured pain and loss that cannot be described, that cannot be comprehended given its magnitude. Our colleagues from the international humanitarian, the heroes who go and provide our people with fabulous services to stay alive in the Gaza Strip, they tell us no matter how we describe to you the horror of Gaza, it's not like seeing it with your own eyes. That's what they tell us. That's what they tell you. as Israelis carries on with its genocidal onslaught. Those who have still survived face violence and death at every corner, starvation and disease hunting them down. Besieged by trauma and despair, displaced from one bombed shelter to destroyed hospital to mass grave to another. While we are grateful for the international mobilization through WHO, UNRWA, and UNICEF and others to stop the spread of polio among our children in Gaza, the fact remains Israel's war machine continues undeterred. Its bombs and missiles killing and injuring every day. Its degrading of life conditions spreading other diseases like wildfire. The vaccine campaign is an emergency undertaking, but not enough to stop the loss of life and suffering. How much more is the international community willing to pay the price for Israel's crime? When will the time come that it insists that Israel bears the costs politically, morally, and financially for its illegal actions? When will the time come when it is decided to finally impose consequences for such defiance and criminality? When will you finally decide to impose a ceasefire, as you suggested, Mr. President, in your statement several times, and we totally agree with you? We need ceasefire. Ceasefire now. Everybody is saying that, not only the Palestinians, but the millions of Israelis who are in the streets, who care about their hostages, and they're saying to their leadership, which is not listening to them, ceasefire now, close the deal, accept, the project or the proposal on the table so that we can stop the killing and save everyone, the Israeli who are hostages and the Palestinians who are prisoners. They are saying that. I'm not saying that. They are saying that. It must be now, because if not, all that will be left is ruins and anger. Every day that we fail them, we sentence so many innocent children, women, and men to death. We must act to protect and save them. That is the only possible response, the only measure of history's judgment. Mr. President, we believe in the rule of law, in the sanctity of human life, in freedom and dignity and justice, in shared peace and security. We believe nothing justifies harming civilians. Nothing justifies harming prisoners. Nothing justifies collective punishment. Nothing justifies inflicting pain on children, regardless of their nationality or race or religion. These are our beliefs. These are our values, and we expect reciprocity as Palestinians are not lesser beings. In a few days, all of you will have a chance to send a clear signal that the unlawful Israeli occupation must end, that this colonial supremacist rule will not be tolerated, that the rights of the Palestinian people must be respected in accordance with the determinations of the ICJ, the highest court of the land, in accordance with the universal rules of international law. It will remind you of your obligation not to be complicit with this cruel occupation and to act decisively to bring it to an end, as soon as possible. Palestine remains the most important test for the international law-based order, a test it cannot afford to fail. When you vote in the General Assembly, and very soon, remember all those who were killed and all those who survived only to endure torment that no human being should endure. It is now or never. Either you stand up to these fanatics, or you watch the fire devour everything on its path. You are either on the side of the arsonists or the firefighters. You cannot be on both sides. You cannot claim you want to extinguish the fire while providing what fuels it. You have to choose, and your choice will be remembered for decades to come, and your choice will affect the lives of millions. We implore you, do not make the wrong choice. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the observer state of Palestine for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would first like to thank the United States, the United Kingdom, and France for calling this overdue session. Carmel Gat was an occupational therapist from Tel Aviv. She was intending on beginning a master's degree in October. She loved travel, music, and meeting new people. Eden Yerushalmi was 24 years old, a vibrant young woman with so many friends and passions. She had two adoring sisters who looked up to her for everything. She was weighed just 36 kilograms when her body was found. Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, an Israeli-American, was born in California and moved to Israel at age 7. He also loved traveling and music festivals and his soccer team, Hapoel Yerushalayim. He was working as a medic to save up for a trip to India. Alexander Lobanov, an Israeli-Russian, was holding onto the hope of meeting his second child with wife Michal, who gave birth while he was being held hostage, a child who will never meet his father. Almog Sarusi was a Ra'anana native who loved traveling around Israel in his white Jeep with his guitar and friends. He was a truly dedicated son, brother, and friend. Ori Danino saved many youngsters at the Nova Festival. He came back, turning his car around to go back and save lives. He loved nature and was a wonderful partner to Liel. These 6 beautiful, innocent, heroic souls were executed by Hamas after more than 330 days of being held captive, deprived of sleep, food, sunlight, the most basic necessities. They dreamt of seeing their loved ones again, parents, siblings, friends, their babies. Last week, Hamas terrorists executed all of them. They shot bullets in the back of each of their heads. Hirsch's mother, Rachel, spoke at his funeral on Monday, finding the only relief she could that her son was finally free. Think about that for a moment. A mother whose child has been murdered, finding comfort only in the thought that he would no longer suffer at the hands of Hamas, that he was beyond the reach of the monsters who are taking him. This is not just grief. It is an agony no one could comprehend. 101 human beings remain captive, their cries for mercy ignored by international indifference. For nearly a year, 334 days, they have been held in the darkness. No sign of life communicated. No access granted to the Red Cross. They were forgotten, left to endure evils that we can barely grasp. The ones who have fortunately returned have exposed the ongoing torment the hostages still suffer on a daily basis. ongoing atrocities. Amit Susanna was dragged from her home by Hamas terrorists and thrown into a living hell. She was held in a child's bedroom, chained to the floor and at the mercy of her guard. He would enter the room, lift her shirt, touch her, grope her, and dehumanize her in every way imaginable. One morning, as she tried to wash herself chained in a bathroom, her guard stormed in, gun in hand, hitting her repeatedly, dragging her back to the bedroom where he forced himself on her. Amit was held for 55 days and nights before she was released. For others, this nightmare continues, day after day, night after night, with no hope. And Amit's story is not an isolated case. Mia Regev, another freed hostage, has testified that every woman held by Hamas has been sexually abused. Every single one. She testified, every woman there experiences some form of sexual harassment. It doesn't matter how you try to beautify or change it. Mia was held for 50 days, but there are women who have been held for much longer. Women who have suffered this torture for almost a year. Women who have been forgotten by the international community. And then there is Agam Goldstein Almog, who was held in a terror tunnel when she was 17 years old, after witnessing the murder of her father and older sister. In that tunnel, she encountered 6 other female hostages. These women told her how they were molested by armed men who entered the room where they were showering. Agam herself was told by a guard that she would live the rest of her life as a chained slave wife in Gaza. Mr. President, what is happening now is unprecedented. We hear many voices demanding that we halt our efforts, lay down our weapons, and question why we continue to fight Hamas in Gaza. The disconnect between the reality of October 7, the massacre, the abductions, and the current situation of the hostages in Gaza is impossible to comprehend. Many of you have forgotten why we are in Gaza. Perhaps you have forgotten, but we have not. We haven't forgotten. We remember the faces of the hostages, their families, and their pleas to rescue them. This disconnection allows some of you to behave as though October 7th never happened, as though there are no hostages, including babies, the Bivas family, and young girls in the hands of Hamas. We have not forgotten. Today, I am here to remind you and the world that we will never forget them. We will never abandon our sons, daughters, sisters, and brothers who are being tortured by monsters. We will never stop until they are brought home. If you truly cared for the Palestinian people and truly wanted to achieve an end to this war that Hamas started, you would officially draft and pass a resolution designating Hamas as a terrorist organization and condemning Hamas for their hostage-taking. Let me be clear, Israel is committed to bringing every one of these hostages home. It is our top priority. But make no mistake, the roadblock to their release is not Israel. It is Hamas, and only Hamas. 3 months ago, on May 27th, Israel, with the full backing of the United States, agreed to a hostage release deal. Hamas refused. Then, on August 16th, after the United States updated the deal framework, Israel once again agreed, and once again, Hamas refused. Even in recent days and hours, as Israel engaged in negotiations, Hamas has remained steadfast in its rejection of all proposals. And yet, the international community continues to direct its pressure at us, at Israel, as though we are the ones holding the hostages, as though we are the ones standing in the way of their freedom. After all, It is far easier to criticize a democratic government than to confront the reality of dealing with terrorists. The terrorists do not sit at this table to defend their actions, no. They have proxies, they have few proxies, their apologists, to do that for them. Where is your outrage? Where is your condemnation of Hamas for these atrocities? Hostage-taking is a violation of international humanitarian law, a violation of Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2474. Hamas has violated 3 Council resolutions that called for the release of hostages. Yet, unless and until this Council condemns Hamas, pressures them, and designates them for what they are, a terrorist organization, it is failing its mandate. We often discuss in this chamber the involvement of UN agencies, the aid and support they are supplying to Gaza. But in these many sessions since October 7th, and this is the first time we dedicate an important session about the hostages, but in all those sessions, how many times you heard or you demand the Red Cross access the hostages? How many times has the WHO raised concerns for the health of the hostages? How many times has UNICEF called for aid to reach them? The double standard is unbearable. Our IDF soldiers risk their lives to rescue hostages. That's what we are doing. Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike. Take the brave rescue of an Israeli Bedouin hostage, Farhan al-Qadi, by Israeli forces, a rescue that put our soldiers at great risk. Only in Israel. Only in Israel would Jewish soldiers risk their lives to bring a Muslim Bedouin Israeli home to his family. Only in Israel would an Orthodox Jewish doctor treat him with the utmost care. Only in Israel his return is celebrated by Jews and Muslims alike. This is a contrast between us and Hamas. We value life. We pray for life. We fight to protect it, while Hamas despises life, using it as a tool for their twisted ideology. Today, Israel mourns the 6 murdered hostages, but our fight is far from over. There are still 101 hostages who remain in the clutches of Hamas, and we will not rest until they are brought home. I call on this Council to direct its energy where it is most needed, to support Israel, pressure Hamas, and for once, issue a clear and unequivocal condemnation of the barbaric terrorist organization that continues to hold innocent lives. I again thank the members of this Council that have demonstrated their moral clarity and their humanity for the hostages. It is appreciated, but truthfully, it is not enough. Now is the time for action. Now is the time for the Security Council to adopt a clear and unequivocal resolution. This doesn't require long negotiations. This doesn't require deliberation. You have a moral obligation to adopt a simple resolution which would say the Security Council condemns Hamas, their atrocities, designates them as a terrorist organization, and demands the immediate release of the hostages. I cannot understand why all of you cannot raise your hands and vote for this language. Whoever cannot raise his hand in favor of this resolution must be honest and ask himself, what are you doing here? Very basic. This action is essential. This action is just. This action is moral. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Vinny, meeting adjourned.